Welcome everybody to another episode of Back to the Basics. I'm here with my buddy Josh. This is episode 3, and today we're going to be diving in and having a discussion about one of my all-time favorite movies, 80s movie classic, cult classic, Big Trouble in Little China.
Dude, I'm excited.
Dude, I've been trying to get you to watch this movie for years.
Years,
okay. My dude.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited that you're finally going to watch it. And I can't wait to see what you think about it.
And we're going to watch it together. I told him years ago, I'm like, hey, there's 2 things that we need to watch together. Smallville Season 10 and Big Trouble in Little China. Because I know how much Eddie is very passionate about both of those things. But today, we're going to be tackling Chinese mysticism, San Francisco, and truckers, I guess. I mean, I don't know.
It's going to be epic, dude.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. And I can't wait to share it with you and see what you think and have a great discussion on an 80s classic. So let's dive into the episode. But before that, where can the people find us, Josh?
They can find us over on our YouTube channel for the video version of every podcast. And we're going to be having exclusive content down the road on the YouTube channel, Back to the Basics. Also, find our podcast, hopefully wherever you like to listen to your podcast.
Yeah.
And we have our Instagram. We try to post daily some nostalgic stuff and things that are close and near and dear to our heart. And also our Twitter. Hey,
it's out there,
yeah. We try to stay nostalgic on Twitter. I know Twitter is a very crazy place right now, but we enjoy it. And like Eddie always says, you know, go ahead and
tweet us.
Tweet.
And don't forget about our Twitch streams. So
yes.
They can find us on Twitch. That's Twitch/Back to the Basics.
Got it.
And yeah, so with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into today's episode. Let's get nostalgic. Let's do this, Josh.
Oh, what the hell?
Yes.
Yo, episode 3, we're getting into, I cannot believe we're actually doing this, but we're going to be talking about Big Trouble in Little China because we just got done watching it. And you've been trying to get me to watch this movie for as long as I've known you.
Years.
It's
literally years.
The beginning of time.
Since we first met each other.
Literally.
I remember sitting in that truck and telling you all about this epic journey 80s classic movie.
We were sitting inside the Pork Chop Express.
The Pork Chop Express itself, Mr. Jack Burton. I told you all about the character, and
yeah.
I believe I played the song for you, the epic
yes.
entrance song that I said that I would love one day to have like an entrance music if I ever became a wrestler. And I was like, this is what I want.
Yeah.
And I played it for you, and I remember you nodding your head a little bit, and you were like, oh, it's pretty
catchy.
dope.
It's catchy.
But until you see the film,
yeah,
and you see like everything that goes along with it,
it was the whole aesthetic sells it, right? The 80s, it's all practical effects. The
that
movie,
classic synth. The synth waves.
Yeah. Oh. Dude, the whole movie was just, that was a ride. Especially if you're into, for actually sitting down and watching it for the whole length of the movie. I saw a lot of 90s movies.
I remember you saying that while
that
we were
I grew up with.
it.
And I was just like, dude, this is exactly like X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I was just like, holy shit. Like,
so what you think about that? What do you, like...
Well, obviously, okay, so this movie was a box office disaster. Right?
A box office failure.
I looked up before we watched it, before you were on your way here, and I was like, I gotta know something about this movie, right?
We can't just
I gotta bring something to the table here. And so basically, the movie was written to set place in the 1880s,
which was wild to me when you told me. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah,
I have never heard this.
It was written as a Western, and there was going to be this Chinese mysticism mixed with this Western, and Jack Burton was going to roll up on a horse. And as we could see with the finished product, it was a truck.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Fucking Jack Burton on the Pork Horse Express. Like what?
The Pork Horse Express.
Like, imagine that for a second. And I'm kind of glad they didn't. But now when you brought that up, I was like, I would love to actually kind of see like that iteration.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like to see what that would have been like.
Hey, dude, release the
Yeah.
the pork chop.
The pork chop cut.
Yeah, release the pork chop cut.
Hashtag release the pork chop cut. But
No,
yeah, dude.
that was cool, and I was like, "Yo, that's interesting." And I was surprised when you got here. I was like, "Did you know that? Like,
that's the first I've ever heard of it. So I'm glad you did that little background.
And basically, the movie was like around 20-something million to make, and it only made in theaters. Box office was only 11 million.
Crazy.
So it was a failure.
Yeah,
like hands down.
Yeah, and that would be a major failure at this point in this day and age.
And it's interesting to know that the production team or whatever, they rushed the movie because they wanted it to release before the Eddie Murphy's The Golden Child.
I remember. Yeah, you were telling me that
Yeah.
they had sort of like this similar
plots or something.
Storyline.
Yeah. Which that's a good movie. I remember.
I've actually never seen it. So
No
now that you
way.
told me that, I would love to go back and watch it because Eddie Murphy, when I was growing up, Beverly Hills Cop, you know, he was huge in those movies.
Golden Child.
Yeah,
check that
so
out.
I might have to check that out.
But yeah, it's kind of an interesting history with how they presented this script with this Chinese mysticism mixing with 1880s like Western like style.
See, that's the part that interests me. I would love to see how those two like collide, you know, because
Yeah.
obviously, of course, Chinese people and Chinese culture was around back then, but to see that in like a Western setting versus like how they did in San Francisco, Chinatown, like my mind just goes all over the place.
And like when we were watching it, I was pointing out things like, oh, look at, he's got the bandoliers, he's got the
Yeah.
revolvers. They mentioned like Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
There's like these Western calls.
That if you didn't know that the script was supposed to be that, you wouldn't catch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
So and I saw that throughout the movie, and there was a lot of things that you caught that I never caught.
That's
and I've seen this
crazy.
movie like probably northwards of 100 times, dude, over
That's
the course of
crazy.
20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, since it came out. And well, I grew up with it in the 90s, of course, but it came out in what, 86?
It came out 86,
Yeah,
1986.
dude.
Best year of all of history.
Of eternity.
Um,
Except 1990, you know, the start of the 90s.
What?
Go 90s.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. 80s today.
But yes, of course.
But how basically, long story short, the production team, or what do you call them? The damn company.
Yeah.
They said, look, no.
The
we
studio.
The studio. We don't want to highlight the 1880s Western. I don't know, because of what was happening in the film industry around, they said San Francisco because there was like a turn of the century thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was a mixture of like what was happening in martial arts.
And if you
at the
look
time.
at it in the movie, there's a lot of like landscape shots, wide shots of like San Francisco. You got the Bay Bridge, you've got
Yes.
Chinatown. Everything is like historic culture, and they show all these really interesting shots.
I think
so you
maybe
can see
that's
that.
yeah. It was like what I guess he was saying when I was reading that is basically how I think that's what when like Chinatown was changing San Francisco. I don't know.
Well, I mean, Chinatown's big in San Francisco. Yeah, it's
but
huge.
around that time with the whole rise of martial arts, with like Bruce Lee and stuff like that.
And that's what we were talking about previously is martial arts in the 80s and 90s. It was huge. Like that was kind of the martial arts like era. You've got movies like Three Ninja, of course,
Oh, God,
Mortal
yes.
Kombat, and it's funny. Yeah, Egg Shan is the grandpa in Three Ninja, and you were like, wait, that's what's his name?
Yeah, I
was
love
like,
him.
hell
I love
yeah.
him, dude. I love him. He's
Yeah,
great.
so you've got all these like martial arts movies coming up, and
Yeah.
this one is like a huge one, dude. They not only mix like martial arts, but they mix Chinese culture. They shooting guns and black magic, Chinese black magic.
Yeah.
That was what you think about that? How was that for seeing it for the first time?
All around, it was good. And what was weird watching this after all this time, like I said, the whole time I was watching the movie, I felt like I've already seen it.
I remember because you were like, wait, this is that part, or this is like, doesn't this happen? And I was like, because you've seen bits and pieces.
I've seen bits and pieces of like the first half of the movie.
Yeah.
There was a lot in the second half. I was like, what? There's that creature that comes out and swallows that guy in the sewer. And then there's that little floating head with all the eyeballs. Like, really good practical effects.
And that was the one thing that I was like, this movie is huge in practical effects.
Yeah.
And there's like the sets. Everything is like custom made. You've seen all those, like when they're in David Lopan's office, and you kept telling me, you were like, dude, I love that set, just the whole look of it. And it's like, so like the Chinese culture,
like the ancient Chinese stuff everywhere. Like
it just jumps out at you.
Beautiful, yeah.
And what I was telling you while we were watching the movie is like all the background stuff and the way everything's set and everything, it creates like this world, this scene, this vision. And that's what, like, for me as a kid, that just like, I just dive head first into it, because you almost get lost in it. Yeah. And that's part of the magic, is on this epic journey, like you just get lost. You just like fall down this rabbit hole of Jack Burton and the Pork Chop Express and his adventure and Chinese culture and black magic. And it's kind of interesting how they hit like all the bases, right? You got super hot chicks, right? Kim Cattrall, she was like
the other chick. Is
yeah, the I think she's Chinese, but yeah, it's Wang Chi's fiance.
Yeah,
he's like, she's gonna change my whole life around.
So like, you got the '80s babes.
Yeah.
You got the beefcake, right?
Jack Burton
like
himself.
Like that American beefcake, which literally didn't really contribute to anything, which I think is funny, that we'll talk about in a little bit.
He's the comedy relief.
But then you had like the badass martial arts.
Yeah. Those fight scenes. Go a little into that. What did you think about the fight scenes?
I mean, the things that immediately just like jumped to my mind was Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
The 90s movie, and Ninja Turtles. I felt like there was a lot that those movies took a lot of inspiration from this movie.
From this film.
Yeah, and you don't know if it's exactly this movie and what the inspiration that led to this to this movie.
Yeah, but somewhere along the lines, it's like, okay, I've seen that before, so we're gonna like.
I mean, this whole scene during the ritual scene, right, where he's like marrying the two brides.
Yeah.
And there's like I don't know if they're the golden Buddha statues or something.
Yeah, they're all Buddha statues all the way around.
That scene, I'm sorry, was copy and paste. Mortal Kombat took that scene.
When they're in the mesh hall.
In the mess hall, yeah, dude. And
Sub-Zero's
they're flexing and flawless victory.
Sub-Zero's like,
dude, yeah. And so I see the whole time we were watching is like, I feel like I've already seen this movie, is because I've seen so many other movies that we grew up with, that literally I feel like almost copy and pasted this movie.
Yeah, Karate Kid, Three Ninjas, Mortal Kombat, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Dragon.
Ooh, yeah. And so that's what I'm saying, is you have all these films that are like rich in like martial arts and Chinese culture and everything, and to go back and watch this, if you had never seen those movies, or like vice versa, if you've seen those movies and then you watch this, now you're like, well, that's from that movie, this is from Ninja Turtles. Like, you would almost think like, oh, this movie copied that from that,
almost,
but this movie came first.
Yeah.
And so
my question to you is, you've watched this movie all this time, right? 100. So many times.
100.
Yeah. How do you think that this movie went from a box office failure to a cult classic?
I think there was a lot of people that saw the movie because maybe at that time in the 1980s, well, you had Star Wars, and they were like big time movies, epic grand adventures, but this movie maybe might have been like the beginning of what I was talking about, like Mortal Kombat and those other cult classics where martial arts was like coming up. So you had martial arts on the rise, and this movie, like you said, the movie was rushed, lower budget, so not a lot of use of extreme effects, so you had a lot of practical effects, and maybe it didn't catch a lot of eyes. But then once it goes to home video and you're able to watch it now on a VHS
video,
coming soon.
I love that.
And so now you're able to watch it in the comfort of your own home. And now it's like later in the 90s, and that's when I watched it. And you have it on VHS. It might come on HBO or something like that. And so you're at home and you're like, martial arts is like bigger now. So you have like Mortal Kombat come out, Street Fighter, Double Dragon, and then you come across this Big Trouble in Little China, and you're like, oh, martial arts, okay, well, oh, it has Kurt Russell in it. You know, Kurt Russell was very new when this movie came out. I think maybe he had done a couple things. I think this was Kim Cattrall's first movie.
No way.
Yeah, I think it was her first ever movie.
In? You talk about her like.
Well, she later went on to star in Sex and the City. That was like her big.
Oh, okay, I recognize her face now.
Yes,
okay.
and she's way older. But this was like one of her first films.
Interesting.
And so, and of course you got John Carpenter, which I don't know if he made Halloween first before this or after this, but he goes on to make Halloween.
In the early 80s.
Yeah, it's probably like it's 70s,
early
80s. But so he was probably riding that high wave and making a name for himself and doing all that. And then you have Big Trouble in Little China.
Well, I guess he's wanted to do he wanted to like get his feet wet in martial arts film.
Exactly.
And I guess with everything that had happened with the studio and the whole shifting, they basically said, you know what, well, we're going to take your story, we're going to change it and piss off, I guess. But they still got credited. I don't know the whole story about the whole original script and everything, but I guess because of the film being rushed, there was just all this stuff that happened on behind the scenes. George Carpenter.
John Carpenter.
John Carpenter said he kind of got a distaste for the industry, and he kind of led him at that time in his career towards independent filmmaking and stuff.
Well, yeah, it probably rubbed him the wrong way. Yeah. And, you know, you have a studio, and it's funny that this is back then and it's happening, and it still happens today. You got studios getting involved and changing the director's idea or rushing a film to try to make a bunch of money, and it's not so much about the money. You know, it's about making a good classic feature film. And imagine if they had let him do like what he initially intended, like what was the script, you know, that he originally wanted. And just you see what we got, and to imagine like there was probably more, you know, there was probably more to it than that. And so if he had not rushed it, it probably would have not been such a big box office failure.
I mean, San Francisco in the 80s, martial arts, big trucker, right?
Yeah.
I can see how the Chinese mysticism and the 1880s would have been interesting, because that would have been, obviously, you're still in the 80s, the 1980s, 100-year difference. You still have people like, oh my God, there's green explosions and lightning coming out
neon
of hands and stuff. Like, that's nuts. But still in the 1800s, you know, you have these Westerners like, oh, like demons.
Imagine
and lights.
how that would have been.
That would have been interesting. I don't think it would have been as good, though.
No, probably not that. And so I am cool. Like, I love the movie. And to see what we got, like, that's amazing. But if they had maybe, you know, a little bit bigger of a budget, maybe not rushed, like, okay, the script you don't like, we're going to change the script. Obviously, he did. But the magic that he put into it, the use of practical effects, the soundtrack, like, let's just talk about the soundtrack in itself.
Epic.
Like, yeah, dude,
Epic.
What did you think about it?
It had me just like going the whole time. You were dancing, you were having it, you were just like, yeah, you were just like, you knew every note. Like, you knew every single note. And you know what, sometimes, I'm not saying this movie's bad in any respect at all. I very much enjoy it. I love old school 80s movies like this. This is why I don't know how I went so far to not watch it, right?
Yeah.
But it's when you can see when somebody enjoys something so much. Yeah. You're just like, you kind of look at it and you go, well, it might not be that like, oh my God, to me, like mind melting. But when somebody else enjoys it so much, they go out of their way, they know every line, they know every tempo to every song on the soundtrack. That's inspiring. That just goes, you know what? Like, this is obviously super special for a reason. And then you kind of, you watch it with a little bit of a different lens, right? Because I was kind of looking at it like what was things that made this movie memorable to someone like you as a child.
Yeah.
And there was some scenes in there where I was like, dude, if I saw that as a kid, that would have scared the shit out of me.
Scared you, yeah. And I think as a kid, you know, I would see a lot of like the martial arts side of it because and I might have seen Mortal Kombat maybe before this movie, like in the 90s growing up, but I was very big into like martial arts films, you know, and so I would always focus on that part. And Jack Burton, he was just like this persona, just like this larger than life, and he was ignorant to everything. And
he was ignorant to like
he's
pretty
like,
much
what is going on?
Everything.
You know,
he was very much of a what's really interesting about this movie is you kind of have the side character. He's like a sidekick to Jack Burton.
Yeah.
But I truly believe Jack Burton was the sidekick the entire movie. He was the sidekick.
Yeah, dude, because you see Wang Chi, every fight scene, he's like whooping ass and like taking out everybody. And then you have that scene where where Jack Burton goes to take his knife out of his boot and it flies across the room. And then Wang Chi's just like ninja kicking everybody.
Dude, ninja kick the damn rabbit.
Yeah.
It was very interesting to see how you have the leader of the movie, the number one star, all over the
and he
poster.
Literally does nothing.
And he literally almost does nothing. He's just caught in the moment. He has his moments.
He's for me, and that's kind of what I alluded to earlier, is he's almost like the comedy relief. Like everything's
definitely.
serious, and he's like, "Will somebody tell me what the hell is going on?" Like he just, and he captures you as an audience member. Like he's just so oblivious to everything. And they even say it in the movie. They're like, you wouldn't understand. Like, we don't want to explain it to you because you won't get it.
He kind of stops talking to him. He kind of stops trying to explain everything at a certain point. He's just like, dude, just follow me. Let's go.
Yeah, just roll with it.
Yeah.
You just roll with it. And you just have these, like, iconic characters. Like, Egg Shen comes in and Wang Chi. And you even have the third little side character, Eddie.
Eddie!
I was like, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
And, but you like David Lopan and the Three Storms. You have all these characters that are just like almost larger than life. You know, they're just so epic. And I remember watching you, and anytime those Three Storms would come on the screen, you're like, what the hell? Like the electricity, and he's just like, ah.
For a movie that was kind of, it wasn't really grounded in like practical effects because there was a lot of special effects.
There was.
But I feel like they could have used the special effects a lot worse, and they didn't. And especially I like that because you had mentioned when special effects, the best movies are a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. Not all practical, yes. Not all special effects, but when you have a beautiful mixture of both, and that's what it was. And when those, what were they called? The Storms?
Yeah, the Three Storms.
Three Storms. When they came out, to me, I was like, dude, you got the Lo Pan guy. He reminded me of like Shang Tsung.
Yeah.
Right. And then you had like those the Storms. You had one guy that reminded you of Raiden. Another guy reminded me of Fujin, the god of wind. And this was like all Mortal Kombat. And I'm really intrigued, and I would like to kind of go back and see how much, because I know it, there's got to be a percentage. How much of this movie inspired Mortal Kombat? Because they talk about the Emperor, and you know he's like sucking their souls or some shit, like all that light. That shit scared me.
Yeah, I remember. I looked over at you.
Whoa, dude!
I looked over at you when it happened. You were like, "What the hell?"
If I seen that, I would be freaked out as a kid. Like I would be like, "Yo," the way his jaw kind of like.
It like drops, and then you just see this light come out of his mouth. And Jack Burton even says that he's like, with light coming out of his mouth. Yeah. Like, and Jack Burton is literally freaked out. He's never seen any of this before. But then you have Wang Chi, and he's like, I've heard all these stories as a kid, and we grow up not wanting to believe like all these stories because the Emperor and him cursing him, that takes place in 202 BC or something like that. So that's like super long ago when China was first.
It was over 2,000 years.
Yeah, dude. And so you've got like this really rich culture and history that they set up throughout the course of this movie. They keep like alluding to it. Mm-hmm. And then you find out like what happened to Lo Pan and everything that went down, and that he's trying to become human and appease the god, appease the emperor, and try to become human again so he can rule the universe. That's what he keeps saying. He was like, I want to rule the universe. And you got Jack Burton, who's just kind of joking here and there, and he's like, oh, are you crazy? Is that your problem? That's one of my favorite lines, dude. And so
I think that pretty much anything Jack Burton said in the movie was one of your favorite lines.
Yeah, and I like gush over it, and it's just he's this epic character, truck driving, like shit talking, but then at the same time he does literally nothing.
I feel like Jack Burton's character, or Jack Burton, I feel like he was like almost the audience. He's you. Because you're just
I've heard of that before.
You're being tossed into this mythical world of mysticism, and you're just kind of like, what?
And so you see everything from like his eyes.
What?
Yeah, I seen something like that. It was like an article or something.
Oh, really?
And it says that like literally you're on this ride with Jack Burton, and that's why you probably relate to him the most, is because as he's going through everything,
you don't understand anything.
You're experiencing it. You're like, what is this? What is that? And so
what's this? What's this?
Another Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You love Jacks.
Exactly. Jack Sparrow, Jack
Burton, Jack Skellington.
Jack Skellington, all of them. They're just iconic characters, and it's something about the name Jack. Like, it just jumps out at you. So my dog's name is Jack. So
of course it is. Of course it is. Of course.
And that's part of this movie. It inspired me. I mean, like, it's funny throughout the course of my being is there's a lot of movies that jump out at me, and all my favorite characters are named Jack, and that might stem from growing up watching this and just being so young and impressionable, and seeing him in the truck, and he's driving through the streets of San Francisco, and as a kid I always wanted to be on that adventure with him, jump in the truck and go on.
And I love how the way you always explain this movie is you always really focused on him as a truck driver.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
special to me.
Yes. Yeah. And I can see how, you related with that a lot, and how the Pork Chop Express is pretty much a character of its own, the truck.
Yes.
And I feel like we were supposed to get a second movie, a sequel. Like, the way this ends, just so open-ended. It ends with a creature literally on the Pork Chop Express as Jack Burton's driving away
into the distance, and then you zoom back and you zoom out, and you come to the end of the truck, and
it's almost like an alien movie.
And there's a lot of like similarities you see in just the slightest way. They almost set up, well, what's Jack Burton's next adventure?
Yeah.
Because of that creature's still alive. So who else is still alive?
Why didn't he kiss that girl?
I think that's in his character. It's in his nature to be kind of like a...
He kissed her when he wanted to.
Exactly.
But then at the end, you can tell she wanted.
He leaves her wanting more, because she did want him at the end.
As an audience member, that's what I got, though, too. You're left wanting more. Like, okay, what's next? More. I like all these characters now.
Exactly.
Let's get on the next adventure.
You want to see what's next.
Yeah.
Because everybody lived from the hero cast.
The press girl hooked up with Eddie.
Yeah.
And they're all hooked up. They got, he got his girl back, and then now she's left alone because Jack's off
doing his adventure. And that's the life of a trucker, dude. He's got to keep moving. He's got to keep moving.
Okay.
And that's what he says. He was like, every now and then, I'm going to rub somebody the wrong way.
Yeah.
And then it's just going to end. And they kind of allude to that in the whole movie. Lopan even tells him, he was like, you seem like someone who, knows very well about relationships and how they seldom ever work out. Like, he tells him straight up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Jack tells him, he goes, he says, like, it's been 2,000 years, like, you've never come across a girl, it's never worked out.
Yeah.
And he's like, of course there's been others, like, there's always others, but it's just the whole movie, and I could line after line after line, and that's for me in this movie. There's a lot of epic classic lines, and they're either like little funny tidbits or like really epic, like that dialogue that he has at the end where he's talking about poison arrows falling from the sky.
I love that.
It's almost like he's busting a promo, like in wrestling. He's just like, bring it on. Like, I'm ready. What's my next adventure? And that's
whatever gets thrown at me. He said, shake the pillars of heaven.
It's just so epic. Like, he's literally telling a story right there. Just that little dialogue. He's like, bring it on. What's my next journey? I'm ready. And as a kid growing up watching that movie, I always wondered, like, is there going to be a part 2? I wanted a part 2. I wanted to see what was next for Jack Burton. And I don't know if you remember, but a couple years back, a certain favorite actor, wrestler of mine wanted to either make a part 2 or remake this movie.
Was that? Okay, I remember that. It was Batista.
No,
who was it? The Rock.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
He wanted to make a sequel to Big Trouble in Little China,
Yes.
and he wanted to play Jack Burton.
Yes. Or he wanted to play a character and still have Jack Burton in there some way, shape, or form.
Like
Kurt Russell.
He wanted to
bring Kurt
back.
Russell in, and also he wanted to see about getting John Carpenter back to work on the movie, whether it either
and
be
it
a
all
script.
fell apart, huh?
And he said, he goes, I don't want to touch it unless it's going to be epic. Unless it's going to be a really good film, because he did the same thing with Jumanji. He said the first one, so great. Robin Williams, like, you almost don't want to touch it.
You really don't.
Because it's beautiful. It's a piece of art. And so he goes, I'm not going to come into it unless it's going to be something that everyone I feel will know and love, and it continues that greatness of a story. And so that's what I think. I think he's just waiting. He's just biding his time till he comes across something. But I think that was his goal, is he wanted to get Kurt Russell and John Carpenter involved in some way, shape, or form. And unless he does, I don't think he's going to touch it. Because it's so epic.
My question is, if this movie, say if this movie, right, wasn't rushed, it came out, it was successful, they greenlit a second film, right?
Yeah.
Say if it made another 10 say if it came out even. It made another 10 million in box office. It came out kind of even. It got greenlit. They made a second one. Do you feel that the first one would have been a cult classic at that point? Do you think that sequels kind of sell out what can become a cult classic if you only have one? Do you think sequels kind of water down the franchise? Because obviously everyone has that terminology, especially back in the 80s and 90s. Sequels are never as good as the original.
Yeah.
Now it's a little bit of a different story in today's world. But then, yeah, it's almost kind of like sequels sucked.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think? If they made a second movie, how would the whole franchise be perceived?
So for me, from my standpoint, I personally always loved sequels. And I've gone into this before where, whether it be like a trilogy, I always loved the second movie a little more than the original.
Really?
Back to the Future 2. Love it. Of course, Back to the Future is great all on its own, part 1. Yeah. But there's something about Back to the Future 2 that just brings me in. And then part 3 kind of falls off. Mm-hmm. Empire Strikes Back.
Ninja
Turtles 2 I love more than the original. Ghostbusters 2 I'd rather watch that than the first. So it's something about that sequel for me is always a little bit better than the original. Mm-hmm. So knowing that and seeing how the first one, well, of course it kind of bombed, but if they would have greenlit a second one and said, well, now let's put them both together as like a continuation of the story, it would have been interesting to see, well, maybe the sequel will almost make the first one a little bit better. Or you're continuing the story, so now there's more. Maybe the audience felt like it just kind of ended. And I remember we were watching it and you were like, that's it? Like, that's the end?
I felt like we just
happened?
Got started.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it was purposefully done that way to set it up for a sequel so that it leaves you wanting more, so that you'll come back. But, of course, I think audiences weren't ready. And if you would have had that sequel, I almost feel like, though, when you make a sequel, there has to be a trilogy. In everything.
Why? I don't think so.
People always want more. They always want more. So even and most of the times, especially like in the 90s, trilogies weren't as good as the sequel. You have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, not as good as part 2.
Well, I think at that point, I think the studios really think that like, let's just throw on a third one. Because it's already gonna sell.
They start throwing things in.
We're gonna sell it.
Yeah.
Like people are gonna go see it, right? Look at the numbers for 1 and 2. People are gonna go see it. But then people go, did you even try that hard?
Exactly. Now you're just throwing things in there just to make another movie. So you got like Back to the Future 3. The plot line was good. They're in the Old West, but there was things about it. It wasn't as special as like part 2. Ghostbusters 2, super epic. Had they made a third one, probably wouldn't have been that great. I don't know. And see, Ghostbusters stopped at part 2. They were like, we're done, you know, until tons of years later, and now they're.
We don't talk about that movie.
Yeah.
But we got a new one coming out, so that should be good.
Yeah, but me personally, I love Big Trouble in Little China.
Dude.
I would love to see, hopefully one day, a sequel. I just hope someone comes along and makes it with the same care and love, and that they actually use that bit of magic, that practical effects, mixed with a little bit, because visual effects rule now. You know, everything is visual effects.
That movie had amazing visual effects. The lightning effects were really good.
And it was really simple. Like, it was just like here and there, like the light coming out of his mouth, the lightning, and they just give you a little bit. Like at the beginning when he does the lightning with his hands, it's very small. That's all it takes. It's very small. And
I think the worst CG in the movie was definitely the ball, right? There was a scene where one of the...
I liked the ball. The ball wasn't that bad.
I liked the ball too, but that's what I'm saying. That was the worst.
Yeah. Well, I didn't like the rubber feet. When the dude goes a little big and he starts blowing up.
That's Thunder, I believe, right?
Yeah. Thunder gets all agitated because his boss dies, and, you know, he basically explodes himself. And when he self-destructs.
Okay, Voltorb, right? He self-destructs.
He self-destructs.
And
how about lightning though, when he comes through and he makes that grand entrance?
Oh, dude, in the sewer when he's like, I was like, why isn't he's sitting there, you know, hitting lightning on the roof, like in the sewer, like above him, and I was like, what is he doing, dude? And you were like, oh, just wait, like, and I was like, wait for what? He's got his enemies in front of him. Start shooting them like Palpatine. Like, what's going on? But then you're like, wait for it, and then he starts walking forward, and then like it falls like all perfectly behind him.
It was just so epic. That scene right there. It was
visually very cinematic.
And I told you, I was like, that looks like Raiden right there, and you were like, that's better than Raiden. Like
from the movie, from the '90s movie.
Yes,
they nailed like if
Raiden, that would be Raiden.
If I've never seen Big Trouble in Little China, and you were like, hey, have you ever seen that Mortal Kombat movie that was set in San Francisco? And I would have been like, what? And you showed me just scenes of it, like light, and you would have been like, this is Raiden. What do you think? And I would have been like, that's better than the 90s Mortal Kombat.
Well,
Raiden.
Wang Chi is Liu Kang. It's canon. It's confirmed.
What?
Wang Chi. The sidekick. He's
Liu
Kang.
Yeah.
Confirmed.
He was badass, dude. So basically, at the end of that movie, when they go into there was like the ceremony and stuff like that.
He kicks ass.
He just, what do they drink, dude? Were they drinking mushrooms? What the hell was that?
7 fang bag or something. I think that's what they call it. 7 bag fang or something. Yeah. It's just like this little potion liquid. Yeah. And Jack even asked him, he's like, what's in it? And he was like, all the best things, you know, like give you a huge buzz, make you do things no one else can do,
see things no one else can see. And then all of a sudden the movie turned into Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yeah.
Right? They're flying through the sky. Like ding, 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 ding.
And it's just really epic, you know. You got these just over the top fight scenes and these over the top scenes. Remember when they're flying through the air and you can see like the neon behind them, and it's over the top.
It is,
but it's really cool.
It really is,
especially for the time, probably in the 80s.
I would have loved to see this in the drive-in.
Ooh, dude.
I would have loved to see this.
Don't even give me that idea, because now I'm gonna go want that. Like, I'm just gonna be like, put on Big Trouble in Little China.
Dude, I mean, honestly, I think right now, what we should do is we should invest in a nice projector, 2 big ass stereo speakers.
So you're saying you want a Back to the Basics drive-in?
Yeah, let's make our own drive-in.
Okay. Yeah. So GoFundMe,
friends and family.
GoFundMe, Ink to the People.
Imagine doing a GoFundMe for a drive-in movie theater, like a local drive-in. That would be so epic.
It's just
imagine having a movie night with your community, like
Back to the Basics. Oh. Big Trouble in Little China, Terminator.
Don't give me ideas.
We could go on and on, but yeah, man. So overall, what this movie for you? Do you want to rate it? Do you want to give it a rating?
I'm not a rating type of guy.
Okay.
I'm not really a rating. I feel like if you rate
be a 10 out of 10 for me. So
I feel like rating something just puts it in a box.
That's true. That's definitely true. how can you put a rating on something like this?
I feel like if you're into martial arts films, if you're into 80s or 90s, and especially 80s movies, if you're kind of around our age, we grew up in the 90s, and so there's probably certain movies. I mean, this movie came out,
86.
Yeah, 86. So
Yeah.
I was 0. so certain movies in the 80s I've missed out on personally, right?
Yeah.
And going back and watching this and seeing how it has influenced so many movies I grew up with,
The culture and the future, and
it's kind of like, respect to your elders. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, it all comes from somewhere,
Respect what came first.
And if you didn't have this movie,
and I'm not saying that this movie is the very first movie to have, Chinese mysticism and action, what I'm saying? But
you could just see
badass movie.
like where it goes, like the timeline, and it's like, okay, like I've seen this before, so maybe.
And I definitely do not think this movie would have been a cult classic without Kurt Russell.
Oh yeah,
He sold the whole thing.
because he's just so oblivious, and he's so like, and you just believe his character. You believe that he's just this American dude, truck driver, like doesn't know anything about the culture, or he's just along for the ride.
Yeah.
He's
He
just
just
on
wants
this
his
journey.
money.
Exactly.
That whole thing
He's
wants
just
his
after
money.
his truck, and you see the line, that classic line. There's my truck. My truck. Like he's this character, and
What about like all the undertones to the movie?
there's a lot.
Did you pick up like that when because I was sitting there trying to make sense of it,
There's a lot.
and I was like, wait a minute, so this is like they're legit like human trafficking.
Yes.
Did you notice that as a kid?
No, not as a kid. I was like, I didn't know what the White Tigers was. I didn't know they were selling people off, but they were literally
That was human
taking those
trafficking.
women, selling them to whorehouses, and
Yeah. And that's interesting that, as a kid, you don't pick up on that stuff.
no,
Because you're just like, oh, what are these
yeah,
what
I
are
just
these
remember
chicks
seeing them throw a girl in the trunk, and
and all these dudes running out of the hotel pulling their pants up? What are they doing?
yeah, so you're oblivious to a
Yeah.
lot of like the undertones and everything, and it's interesting to see that as an adult. But for the most part, like you're just like in awe of like the
Yeah.
action and the score. The score is just, it pulls me in. For me, I'm a big score guy. If you have a score in a movie that's epic, I'm there.
Sets the tone,
It
literally.
definitely. And it did set the tone.
Yeah.
It drove the film. Every time it got a little more intense, the
I felt
score
like
heightened.
pretty much that whole movie, there was that, doo, 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 doo. Like, it was just like, okay, what's going to happen?
And that's
Let's get
classic
this.
80s.
Yeah, it was like this tension build.
Classic 80s.
Right?
Yeah.
And John Carpenter knows how to build tension.
Build attention.
Right, from Halloween and shit.
A reveal. You have multiple reveals in this movie.
True.
Or like when lightning and thunder is coming through, and you have that big entrance. Like that's
Yes.
And you even go back to the beginning of the film, and you even told me, when the truck comes over the hill.
And just cue the music right. You got that long shot of the road, and then boom, the truck just pops up.
Da-na-na. Just epic, dude.
Yeah.
And so that's huge for me. Is this movie? It made me fall in love with the culture and the style of the 80s and martial arts. And at the end of the day, what more do you have to ask for?
Hey, dude, 80s babes, beefcakes, and martial arts. I'm there. It was a great recommendation.
Trucks
and big ass trucks. There you go. You got to get that tank top.
I would love to get that tank top.
They got it on Amazon.
One of these days, man.
Yeah, maybe one day you're gonna show up to the dojo and it's just gonna be sitting here shining under a light.
Don't you tempt me.
Yeah. Great recommendation. I'm actually really excited and happy that I didn't watch this on my own, that we watched it together.
Yes.
So
I would love
cool.
to have more experiences like this, and do more episodes of us watching old school and new school movies together.
Hell yeah. 80s all day.
So until next.
Before we go,
Ooh.
we do know that there is a sequel, the comic book, right? That
I
we didn't
forgot
touch on
about
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe sometime in the future we'll have to sit down and read some of it and have a discussion.
That would be cool.
Because I would be interested to see where they went with the comic.
What the storyline is.
What the storyline is. What characters come back.
There's still a couple comics I still have to get from that comic to complete my set. So I'm still going to have to do those. But
that'd be fun.
This man got me the first comics
graphic novel.
That sequel. And so it's see, there was always supposed to be a sequel. And I totally forgot about that, but yeah.
It's exciting.
Definitely.
But it's been good, dude. Great recommendation.
Yeah. I'm glad you liked it, dude.
What's your favorite line out of the whole movie?
Oh, what the hell. or Jack Burton always says at a time like this, oh, what the hell.
Until next week, friends. Yo, that was a fun discussion about Big Trouble in Little China.
Man, it was great to finally watch it with you, and then to have that in-depth discussion afterwards. What you think, man?
Dude, I mean, this movie is super entertaining. I don't know how I went my whole life without watching this, really. I mean, I don't know if I was more entertained by the film or by Eddie over here dancing to the entire soundtrack the whole time.
It's a really epic soundtrack, man, and go ahead and check it out. Listen to the soundtrack. You will see what he's talking about.
Classic 80s.
Yeah, dude. I'm glad you finally stuck around to watch it, and we got to share that together. It was epic. So until next time, friends, check us out on all the social media platforms. And Josh, what else you got?
Not much. We appreciate your support. Appreciate your energy. Thanks for sticking around and listening to two besties sitting here drooling over stuff they love. Until next Saturday, friends, stay nostalgic on that eternal quest to get back to the basics. Peace.